Hey there, garden friends. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to channel for all things gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces both indoors and out. I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into something really special, plants you can actually plant in December. Now, I know what you might be thinking. December? Isn't that when everything's supposed to be dormant and the garden's taking a winter nap? Well, here's the thing. December is actually one of those secretly brilliant months for getting certain plants into the ground, and I'm going to share with you my top 8 favourites that absolutely thrive when planted during this time. Whether you're dealing with frost, mild winters, or something in between, there's something here for everyone. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's talk about how to make the most of this wonderful month in your garden. December planting might seem counterintuitive at first, but it's actually rooted in some really solid gardening wisdom that's been passed down through generations. When you plant certain species during winter dormancy, you're giving them a head start that spring-planted varieties just can't match. The soil is still workable in many regions, the plants aren't stressed by heat, and they have months to establish their root systems before the growing season kicks into high gear. I learned this lesson years ago from my neighbour Oliver, who had the most spectacular garlic harvest I'd ever seen. When I asked him his secret, he just smiled and said, "December planting, my friend. December planting." That simple conversation changed how I approached winter gardening entirely, and now I'm passing that wisdom along to you. The beauty of December is that nature does a lot of the work for you. The cooler temperatures mean less watering, fewer pests, and plants that settle in gradually rather than being shocked into rapid growth. Let's start with something that's absolutely legendary in the December planting world: garlic. If you've never grown your own garlic, you're missing out on one of the most rewarding experiences a gardener can have. There's something deeply satisfying about taking those individual cloves, tucking them into the soil as winter approaches, and then pulling up massive, flavorful bulbs the following summer. Garlic needs that cold period, what we call vernalization, to develop properly. When you plant garlic in December, each clove goes through a natural cycle where the cold triggers it to divide and form a full bulb. Without that cold exposure, you just get a single, undivided clove, which isn't what we're after at all. The process is wonderfully simple. Choose the largest, healthiest cloves from organic bulbs. Avoid supermarket garlic treated with sprout inhibitors. Plant them about 2 inches deep with the pointed end up. Space them roughly 6 inches apart, and then just let nature do its thing. I remember Rose, a community gardener I know, telling me about her first garlic crop. She was skeptical about winter planting, but she tried it anyway with just a small bed. Come July, she harvested the most beautiful hard-neck garlic with these gorgeous purple stripes, and she's been a December garlic planter ever since. The flavour of homegrown garlic is incomparable. It's got this depth and complexity that makes everything you cook taste better. Moving on to something equally fantastic, we have broad beans, also known as fava beans in some parts of the world. These are absolute champions of cold weather planting, and December is prime time for getting them into the ground. Broad beans are incredibly hardy. They can withstand frost, snow, and all sorts of weather that would kill more tender plants. What makes them perfect for December is that they'll establish a strong root system during the winter months, and then when spring arrives, they'll shoot up quickly and give you an early harvest. The beans themselves are delicious, whether you eat them fresh or dried, and the plants actually improve your soil by fixing nitrogen, which means they're feeding your garden while they grow. I've found that autumn-sown broad beans are generally more productive and less troubled by aphids than spring-sown ones, which is a huge bonus. The planting process couldn't be easier. You just push the large seeds about 2 inches into the soil, space them about 8 inches apart in rows, and they'll germinate when conditions are right. Some gardeners like to start them in pots under cover and transplant them, which works beautifully too, especially if you have issues with mice or birds eating the seeds. There's a wonderful story about a gardener named Lucas who grew broad beans every December for 40 years. He'd save seeds from his best plants each season, and by the end, he had this incredible strain that was perfectly adapted to his specific garden conditions. That's the beauty of growing the same plants year after year. You develop a relationship with them, and they become part of your garden's unique character. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now let's talk about something that might surprise you. Bare root roses. December is actually one of the very best times to plant roses, particularly bare root specimens. When roses are dormant, which they are in December, they can be lifted, transported, and replanted with minimal stress. Bare root roses are younger plants that have been grown in fields and then lifted during dormancy, so they come to you without any soil around the roots. This might look a bit alarming if you've never seen them before. They're basically just roots and stems with no leaves. But don't let that worry you. These plants are incredibly vigorous once they get established. The advantage of December planting is that the rose has all winter to settle into its new home and develop a strong root system before it needs to put energy into growing leaves and flowers. When spring arrives, your rose will burst into life with much more vigor than a container-grown rose planted at the same time. The planting technique is important. You want to dig a hole that's wide and deep enough to accommodate the roots without cramping them. Create a small mound of soil in the center of the hole, spread the roots over this mound, and then backfill with a mixture of soil and well-rotted compost. Make sure the graft union, that knobby bit where the stems meet the roots, is just at or slightly below soil level. Water thoroughly even though it's winter because you want to settle the soil around the roots and eliminate air pockets. Fruit trees and bushes are another December superstar, and this is honestly one of my favorite things to plant during this month. Whether you're looking at apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, or soft fruit like currants and gooseberries, December planting gives them the absolute best start. Like roses, fruit trees are typically sold as bare root plants during dormancy, and the same principles apply. They're lifted from growing fields and need to be planted while they're dormant. The root systems on bare root fruit trees are often more extensive and better formed than container-grown specimens, which means better anchorage and more efficient nutrient uptake once they start growing. When you plant a fruit tree in December, you're giving it months to establish before the spring growth spurt, which translates into healthier trees and often earlier fruiting. I remember visiting an orchard where the owner, Ivy, showed me rows of trees she'd planted over the years. The December-planted trees were noticeably more vigorous and productive than identical varieties planted in spring. She explained that those winter months allow the roots to spread out and really get comfortable. So when spring arrives, the tree doesn't have to split its energy between adjusting to a new home and pushing out new growth. It can just focus on growing. The planting process for fruit trees requires a bit more effort than smaller plants, but it's well worth it. You need a good-sized hole, plenty of organic matter mixed into the soil, a stake for support during the tree's first few years, and proper placement so the graft union is above ground level. One tip I always share is to really firm the soil around the roots as you backfill. You want good contact between roots and soil without any air gaps. Onion sets are another absolute must for December planting, and they're so easy that they're perfect for beginners. Onion sets are small, immature onion bulbs that you plant instead of growing from seed, which saves you months of time and effort. When you plant onion sets in December, they'll sit quietly in the ground over winter, develop roots, and then shoot up quickly when spring arrives. This gives you earlier onions than spring planting, and often larger, healthier bulbs as well. The Japanese onion varieties are particularly well suited to December planting because they're bred specifically for overwintering. You just push the sets into the soil so that the tip is barely visible, space them about 4 inches apart in rows, and then leave them alone. One thing to watch out for is birds, who sometimes like to pull up freshly planted sets. If this happens in your garden, you can cover the area with netting or fleece until the sets are firmly rooted. The beauty of onions is that they're such a fundamental kitchen ingredient. Having a steady supply of homegrown onions means you're never running to the store for this basic staple. A friend of mine, Daisy, started planting onion sets every December after she retired, and now she grows enough to last her entire year. She strings them up in her garage to cure, and they keep beautifully right through to the next harvest. There's something wonderfully traditional and self-sufficient about having braids of onions hanging in your storage space, knowing you grew every single one. Rhubarb is one of those plants that seems almost indestructible once it's established, and December is a fantastic time to plant new crowns. Rhubarb crowns are the root sections that contain buds, and planting them while they're dormant gives them the best possible start. What I love about rhubarb is that it's incredibly low maintenance. You plant it once and it'll produce for 20 years or more in the same spot. The key to successful rhubarb growing is giving it plenty of space and rich soil, because these are hungry plants that appreciate generous feeding. When you plant a rhubarb crown in December, you're taking advantage of the dormant period to let it settle in without any stress. Come spring, it'll send up those beautiful pink and red stalks that make such wonderful pies, crumbles and compotes. The planting technique is straightforward. Dig a hole about a foot deep and wide, add plenty of well-rotted manure or compost to the bottom, place the crown so the buds are just at soil level, backfill and water well. Then you just need to be patient. Don't harvest any stalks in the first year, take just a few in the second year, and from the third year onwards you can harvest as much as you like. I once knew a gardener who inherited a rhubarb plant that had been in the same spot for 40 years, and it was still producing prolifically every spring. That's the kind of long-term relationship you can have with a well-planted rhubarb crown, and starting in December gives you the best foundation for that relationship. Asparagus crowns are another long-term investment that benefits hugely from December planting. Asparagus is one of those vegetables that requires patience. You plant the crowns, wait 2 or 3 years before harvesting, and then enjoy 15 to 20 years of delicious spears every spring. That might sound like a long wait, but it's absolutely worth it. Fresh asparagus is a completely different vegetable from what you buy in stores. It's sweeter, more tender, and has this incredible depth of flavour that makes it a true delicacy. December planting works beautifully for asparagus because the crowns are dormant and can be handled without damage, and they'll have all winter to establish their root systems before spring growth begins. The planting process is a bit more involved than some other plants, but it's not difficult. You need to create a trench about 8 inches deep and a foot wide, form a ridge of soil along the bottom of the trench, spread the asparagus roots over this ridge like an octopus, and then cover with about 2 inches of soil. As the shoots grow, you gradually fill in the trench over the growing season. The key is really good drainage and plenty of organic matter because asparagus won't tolerate waterlogged soil. I remember reading about an old Victorian kitchen garden that had asparagus beds that were over 100 years old, still producing prolifically because they'd been properly established and maintained. When you plant asparagus in December, you're creating something that could potentially outlive you, which is a pretty amazing thing when you think about it. Let me tell you about shallots too, because they're another wonderful December planting option that often gets overlooked. Shallots are like onions' more refined cousins. They have a milder, sweeter flavour and they're absolutely brilliant in cooking. Like onion sets, shallots are planted as small bulbs, and December is perfect timing for them. They'll overwinter in the ground, establish good root systems, and then bulk up in spring to give you clusters of new bulbs by midsummer. Each shallot you plant typically produces 5 to 8 new bulbs, which means excellent value from your planting effort. The technique is the same as for onion sets. Push them into the soil so just the tip shows, space them about 6 to 8 inches apart, and protect them from birds if necessary. What I particularly love about shallots is that they store even better than onions. They'll keep in a cool, dry place for months and months without sprouting or deteriorating. A chef friend once told me that shallots are her secret weapon in the kitchen, and once she started growing her own, she never went back to buying them. There's something about the flavour of homegrown shallots that just can't be matched by commercial ones. They're also relatively trouble-free. They don't get many pests or diseases, they don't require much maintenance, and they're ready to harvest at a time when you're looking forward to fresh produce from the garden. Now, throughout all of this December planting, there are some general principles that apply across the board, regardless of what you're putting in the ground. Soil preparation is absolutely crucial. Even though it's winter and you might be tempted to just shove plants in and hope for the best, taking time to prepare your soil properly will pay dividends come spring. This means clearing weeds, digging in organic matter like compost or well-rotted manure, and ensuring good drainage. If your soil is heavy clay that stays waterlogged in winter, consider creating raised beds or adding lots of grit and organic matter to improve structure. Conversely, if you have very sandy soil that drains too quickly, organic matter will help it retain moisture and nutrients. The beautiful thing about working with soil in December is that you're not fighting against heat and dryness. The soil is typically moist and workable, which makes the physical labour easier. Another universal principle is timing within December itself. Early December is generally better than late December, especially if you're in a region that gets hard freezes, because it gives plants more time to settle in before the ground becomes rock hard. However, if you miss early December, don't despair. As long as the ground is workable and not frozen solid, you can still plant successfully. Protection is another consideration that varies depending on your climate. In milder regions, you might not need any protection at all for December plantings. But if you're in an area with harsh winters, a layer of mulch over your planted areas can help regulate soil temperature and prevent frost heaving, which is when repeated freezing and thawing pushes plants out of the ground. Straw, chopped leaves, or bark chips all work well as winter mulches. For taller plants like broad beans, you might want to provide some windbreak protection if you're in an exposed location. Cloches or fleece can also be useful for giving plants a bit of extra shelter during the very coldest periods. I've found that it's better to err on the side of caution with protection. It's easy enough to remove mulch or fleece when milder weather arrives, but it's much harder to save plants that have been damaged by cold. That said, don't overprotect plants that are genuinely hardy. They need some exposure to cold to trigger their natural cycles, and wrapping them up too much can actually do more harm than good. Watering in December seems counterintuitive because it's typically a wet month in many regions, but it's still important, especially right after planting. When you first plant something, whether it's a garlic clove or a fruit tree, you need to water it in thoroughly to settle the soil around the roots and eliminate air pockets. After that initial watering, you can generally rely on natural rainfall to keep things moist, but do keep an eye on things. If you have a dry spell or if your planting area is under the shelter of trees or buildings, you might need to water occasionally. The key is to check the soil rather than watering on a schedule. Stick your finger into the soil, and if it feels dry an inch or two down, water gently. Overwatering in winter can be just as damaging as underwatering, because cold, waterlogged soil can lead to root rot and other fungal issues. It's all about finding that balance where the soil is consistently moist, but never soggy. One thing I want to emphasize is that December planting isn't just about getting plants into the ground. It's about setting yourself up for a whole year of gardening success. When you plant in December, you're working with nature's rhythms rather than against them. You're giving plants time to settle in, establish roots, and prepare for vigorous growth when conditions are right. This approach requires a bit of faith because you won't see immediate results. You'll plant your garlic cloves, onion sets, and fruit trees, and then for months it'll look like nothing much is happening. But underneath the soil, incredible things are going on. Roots are spreading, plants are adapting to their new homes, and all the biological processes that support healthy growth are taking place. Then when spring arrives, you'll see the payoff. Plants that shoot up strongly, produce abundantly, and establish themselves as permanent, productive parts of your garden. There's also something deeply satisfying about getting out into the garden in December when many people think gardening is done for the year. It's a quieter time in the garden, without the frenzy of spring planting or the maintenance demands of summer. You can take your time, think about what you're doing, and really connect with your space. I find December planting to be almost meditative. It's cold enough that you're not overheating while you work, there are fewer insects buzzing around, and you can focus completely on the task at hand. Plus, knowing that you're investing in next year's harvest gives you something to look forward to during the darkest months of winter. When January and February roll around and outdoor gardening really isn't an option, you can look out at your garden and know that under the soil, your December plantings are quietly doing their work. Let me share a bit more about the specific growing conditions that make December planting successful. Temperature is obviously a big factor. You want the soil to be cool but workable. If the ground is frozen solid, you'll need to wait for a thaw before planting. In regions with very mild winters, December might actually be warmer than is ideal for some plants that need cold stratification, but generally most temperate zone gardens are at perfect temperatures for December planting. Day length is another consideration, though it's less critical than temperature. By December, we're at or near the shortest days of the year, which means plants aren't getting much light for photosynthesis. This is actually fine for dormant plantings because the plants aren't trying to grow leaves or flowers, they're just settling in below ground. Soil structure is crucial, as I mentioned earlier, but it's worth emphasizing again. If water pools on your soil surface after rain, or if you can squeeze a handful of soil into a solid, sticky ball, you have drainage issues that need addressing before planting. Most of the plants I've discussed today need well-drained soil. They might tolerate cold and frost, but they won't tolerate sitting in waterlogged conditions. I want to talk a bit about the mental side of December planting too, because I think it's genuinely important. Gardening in winter, when everything looks dead or dormant, requires a different mindset than summer gardening. You're planting things you won't harvest for months, and you're doing it on faith that spring will come and everything will work out. This delayed gratification is actually really valuable in our instant results culture. It teaches patience, encourages planning ahead, and connects you to natural cycles that don't care about our human desire for immediate outcomes. Every time I plant garlic in December, I'm reminded that good things take time, that nature operates on its own schedule, and that my job as a gardener is to work with those rhythms rather than trying to force things. There's wisdom in that, and I think it makes us better gardeners, and maybe even better people. When you harvest your December-planted crops in summer, there's this wonderful sense of accomplishment that comes from having planned ahead and trusted the process. Community and sharing are also important aspects of December planting. If you're part of a gardening community or have gardening friends, December is a great time to swap plants, share techniques, and inspire each other to keep going when the weather is less than inviting. I've been part of several December planting parties over the years where a group of gardeners gets together to plant a community plot or help each other with larger projects like establishing fruit trees. Working together makes the physical labor easier, and the shared experience creates bonds and stories that last for years. Plus, there's always someone who knows a trick or has a solution to a problem you're facing. That collective wisdom is invaluable, and December planting provides a perfect opportunity to tap into it. Even if you're gardening solo, consider documenting your December plantings. Take photos, keep notes about what you planted where, and record any observations. Come summer, you'll be able to look back and see exactly what worked and what didn't, which helps you improve year after year. Let me also address some common concerns and questions that come up around December planting. One of the most frequent is, what if it freezes right after I plant? This is definitely a valid concern, but most of the plants I've discussed are hardy enough to handle freezing temperatures. The key is making sure they're properly planted at the correct depth. Too shallow, and they might heave out of the ground. Too deep, and they might struggle to emerge in spring. Another common worry is, will anything actually grow? And the answer is a resounding yes, but with the caveat that you need to choose appropriate plants. Everything I've mentioned today is tried and tested for December planting, but that doesn't mean every plant in existence will thrive planted at this time. Stick with known winter-hardy species, and you'll have success. People also ask about wildlife damage, particularly from birds pulling up newly planted sets or mice eating planted cloves. This is a real issue in some gardens, and protection with netting or wire mesh can be necessary. I found that pressing sets in firmly and covering the area with a layer of mulch or fleece helps deter birds, while wire mesh laid over the soil surface prevents mice from digging. These protections can usually be removed after a few weeks once plants are established. Weather patterns are changing, and that affects December planting too. Some regions are experiencing milder winters than they used to, while others are seeing more extreme cold snaps. This variability means you need to pay attention to your specific local conditions rather than just following general guidelines. Keep an eye on long-range weather forecasts, talk to local gardeners about what they're experiencing, and be prepared to adapt your plans if necessary. If a particularly harsh cold snap is forecast right after you plant, adding extra mulch protection can help. If it's unseasonably warm, you might need to water more than expected. Flexibility and observation are key skills for any gardener, but they're especially important in December when conditions can be unpredictable. As we wrap up this journey through December planting, I want to encourage you to try at least one or two of these plants this year. You don't need to do all 8. Even just planting some garlic cloves or onion sets will give you experience with winter planting and set you up for a delicious harvest next year. Start small, build confidence, and expand your December planting repertoire year by year. The garden is a place of experimentation and learning, and every planting season teaches you something new. December planting might seem unusual or even counterintuitive at first, but once you experience the benefits firsthand, you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. The key is to just get started. Grab some gloves, head out to the garden, and put something in the ground. You'll be amazed at how rewarding it is to garden in winter, and come summer, you'll be reaping the literal fruits of your December labor. Remember that gardening is a journey, not a destination. Every season brings new challenges and opportunities, and December is no exception. By planting now, you're not just growing vegetables or fruits, you're cultivating patience, connecting with natural cycles, and investing in your future self who'll be harvesting and enjoying these crops. You're also building soil health, supporting local ecosystems, and creating beauty in your space. These might seem like lofty goals for something as simple as planting a few garlic cloves, but that's the magic of gardening. Small actions create big impacts over time. So bundle up, get outside, and embrace December planting. Your garden will thank you, your kitchen will thank you, and you'll thank yourself when you're enjoying homegrown produce, while everyone else is just starting their spring planting. Here at Botanic Haven, we're all about making gardening accessible, enjoyable, and successful for everyone. And I hope this guide has given you the confidence and knowledge to make December a productive planting month in your garden. Happy planting, friends, and I'll see you in the next video.